Chapter 17. Meiling had come to the vault, a small room, presumably underground, with not a scrap of furniture to soften the hard stone edges. With her head in Fei Yan's lap, their hands clasped, and guards standing over them like pillars of stone. Her mind was foggy, her cheeks tight from dried tears, her eyelashes crusty. Her body, however, had never felt better, despite the many, many hours that had passed since she'd last eaten. When she tentatively reached up to her face and touched her nose, there was no pain. Not a single bruise marred her skin. Her heart was another matter. "He's dead. It's better that you reconciled yourself to that terrible fact and moved on," part of her said. The other part screamed, wept, wailed. "He can't be dead. He isn't dead. I won't accept it. He's alive. I'll do anything to make him be alive." This was a nightmare she would never wake up from. Fei Yan's free hand stroked Meiling's hair, working through tangles. Gentle and soothing. It only served to make her number. Eventually, Meiling forced herself to sit up. When she stole a glance at her friend's face, the healer didn't return the look, keeping her profile turned. On that profile, teeth nibbled a quivering lower lip. When Meiling squeezed her hand, Fei Yan finally turned. Her eyes were full of gleaming, unshed tears. Nevertheless, she offered a shaky smile and a shrug. Then she turned away, biting her lip harder. The sight cut Meiling like a blade. She scooted closer, wrapping her arm around Fei Yan and leaning her head on the healer's shoulder. Fei Yan responded at once, laying her head on Meiling's, her face crumpling as a few tears slipped free. Shu Zhen, who watched from the opposite side of the room, didn't stop them. "Did you kill him?" She was too terrified to ask. As long as she didn't confirm Shang was dead, there was always the hope he was alive. She didn't think she could face a world that didn't have him in it. "We should get some sleep," said Fei Yan in a brisk tone that seemed a cover for her covert tears. "We might be in here all night." They settled on the floor. No blankets, no head cushions. They rested their heads on hard stone, facing each other with clasped hands between them. Meiling closed her eyes. A shuddering breath escaped her lungs. It would be a miracle if she fell asleep in such an uncomfortable position. And yet, there was no denying the deep exhaustion creeping like a phantom behind the influences of Fei Yan's healing magic. Much faster than she thought possible, she lost herself to tormented dreams of Shang's bloody face, his horror-struck eyes, and the ghosting memory of his breath across her lips. The silence after battle was thicker than the blood that pooled on flagstone. When they were finally let out of the vault, it was after dawn, and not a single body remained. The phoenixes perched on their towers, their flames flickering lazily, their bellies protruding. She wanted to vomit. The long night had passed. Daybreak shone red and bloody. The fortress stood. Zedong's defenses held, and Shang was most likely dead. Dead because of her. She had to push away that thought. Otherwise, grief and guilt would shatter her into 1,000 pieces. She was exhausted and very, very hungry. When Zedong came to retrieve them, he looked, in some ways, even worse than she felt. But that mad light shone in his eyes, and there was a determined swing to his step that scared her. She and Fei Yan were given bread to scarf down before Zedong ordered her to that dreadful chamber he reserved for her magic. There wasn't an ounce of warmth in him this morning, No veneer of kindness. Meiling didn't resist when one of the brigands escorted her up the flight of stairs. Didn't resist when he kept prodding her to move faster. Had Zedong taken prisoners? The door opened in front of her. Her eyes roved in the dimness, trying to catch any sign of Xu Zhen. Any sign of whether the threat she was about to face were real or painted by magic. But there was no looming shadow. Only Zedong standing with a strange look on his face, arms crossed and legs braced wide. At his feet, a man in armor knelt in chains. Not Shang. Zedong must have taken some of the Junning High warriors captive specifically for this purpose, for her to hunt through their minds and divulge their secrets. Zedong spoke without greeting or preamble. His voice cracked slightly, as if he had been yelling all night. But his words were no less authoritative.
Confirm the purpose of last night's attack. Find any other information about where and how the Emperor will strike next.
No threats. No knives held against quivering flesh. No tears or blood. He expected her to obey. He need not threaten her anymore. Not verbally. She knew as well as he by now that he could make her do anything. All his threats hovered in the air, compelling her feet forward toward the bed, making her sit down on its hard surface. At least this time, she did not think she would need help falling asleep. She was so exhausted after a night of restless dozing. Even so, before she could prepare herself, Zedong stepped forward and plunged his blade into her finger. She cried out, a thin, hollow sort of cry. Blood flowed. Meiling rose out of her body, numbly taking stock of the room. The prisoner knelt with his head down, but the rest of his posture indicated no submission whatsoever. His strong hands were balled into fists around the chains connecting his shackles, his young, broad shoulders set with stubbornness. What sort of mind did he possess? Would he even have the information that Zedong sought? He didn't bear the insignia of a high-ranking officer. Her gaze strayed to Zedong, whose gaze hadn't shifted from her limp body. The gray in his hair seemed more prominent now, as did the lines forming on his face. He could only be in his 40s, but he suddenly seemed so much older now. Black magic reached out like groping tentacles from his chest, overpowering whatever his natural soul glow was. She was tired of being his puppet, tired of letting him win, tired of letting him steal and take from her while clothing her in finery, tired of listening to his lies and manipulations. She was tired of losing those she loved to his evil machinations. She was sick that his vengeance was why someone as good, noble, and brilliant as Shang had been another body lying on the ground last night. Fei Yan fought despite knowing she would lose. She never gave up. She was no one's puppet. Fei Yan was her own self. Only a fool would fight like her. A fool, or someone who refused to give up hope. Someone who believed that someday she would win. If she bided her time and fought faithfully every chance she could scrape together, someday she was bound to win. And then no one would ever bind her again. Pa had come to save her. Shang had come, even if it was just because of her magic. She was not forgotten. How many lives had been lost to recover her? How many more would be during this war? Because they were in a war now. No more vague mentions of barbarians amassing on the northern borders. Junning High was at war. They had tried to save her, and they had failed. There was no knowing when a second attempt could be made. At least weeks, as the troops reassembled, recovered themselves, and planned a better strategy. One that probably involved taking out those deadly phoenixes sooner rather than later. And she did not want to stay here for weeks longer. Which meant she needed to save herself. And Feyen. Meiling glanced at the kneeling, rebellious, yellow-glowing wielder. She followed his angry gaze to the towering, black-clad form who held his hands behind his back, a stance of power and dominance. Escaping was not enough. Fang Zedong would burn the world if he could. He would tear through cities, razing as he went, all in the name of his new society that would remove shame from magicless people. A society that would be built solely around loyalty to his power. An empire forged on manipulations and deceptions and false hope. She needed to defeat Fang Zedong. More than she needed to escape, more than she needed to be free, more than she needed anything else in the world. No one knew him like she did now. No one could have seen the destruction he was capable of, the blood he was willing to shed.
Meiling,
Zedong growled.
Enter his mind.
How did he know she hesitated? She floated to the man, someone she very much did not want to see slow sliced to death before her. She had no choice, did she? With a burst of speed, Meiling flung herself into his mind. Not the young wielder's mind, but Fang Zedong's mind. Chapter 18. Fog clung to her awareness. It was like walking through a dream. Meiling moved as though a syrupy marshland bogged down her limbs. Empty, darkened hallways stretched before her vision, clouded by dense, obscuring fog. It was mostly silver, but the edges were laced with blackness. This place was familiar. Meiling recognized it from when she'd visited Yun and Hao while they trained. This was the academy. It was colorless. She struggled to penetrate deeper into Zedong's mind. If the threshold was so difficult, what about those hidden passages where he hid his deepest secrets and fears? The things that she needed to find. Undaunted, she slogged forward, and gradually became aware that she was not alone. A shadow whispered on the edge of her awareness. Was that a wisp of hair that flicked away, just at the end of the hallway? She plunged after it. Having a tangible goal made the fog stop clinging so heavily, and she was able to move a little faster. Not fast enough. As soon as she burst around the corner, she barely caught sight of a ghostly hand disappear into one of the many partitions that made up the academy dormitories. Growling with frustration, Meiling hurried faster. She dared not speak. Not in this mind. He would hear her and know she was here. She slid open the flimsy, paper-like door and glimpsed a red robe embroidered with blue lotuses. Then the shadow was gone. There was nowhere for it to go in this tiny room, so she backed out of it and stared down the colorless hall. The fog grew thicker, shrouding her view. There was a flash of glossy black hair. Meiling chased it. She chased it because she knew it. There was no one else it could be. There was no one else in this mind. Except voices. Voices much like the ones that had haunted her when she'd touched the purple, sharp-edged, poisonous leaf. Voices. No, there was only one voice. But it was muddling and speaking over itself again and again, incessantly. She could hardly make out the words. Then, as though the sun broke through clouds, she heard them clear as day just as she almost caught up to the vanishing shadow. I pity you. I pity you. I pity you. A woman's voice. A gentle, brave woman's voice. A voice edged in heartfelt emotion, in honesty. Pity, 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 pity. That one word rung out above the rest. Meiling reached out, and her fist closed around vanishing lotus-embroidered robes. At long last, she cried out, "Ma, come back to me! Stop running!" The figure kept running. She laughed sweetly, and Zedong's mind reacted to that sound. Beneath the choking fog was the pulse of a beating heart. This voice, this memory of her mother, was much younger than when she had ever heard it. Tinges of raw emotion, of hopefulness and belief, of naivete. A roar sounded above. The dormitory walls shredded and crashed in a rustle to the smooth, cold floor. Plaster fell straight through Meiling's formless spirit. Blackness descended. Something lowered from the ceiling. It crawled with the stealth of a spider, chittering almost silently as it came. It wasn't a soul, wasn't part of Zedong's mind, and yet it was almost sentient. Its aliveness burned her nostrils. Then, its intention wafted over her with the force of a tsunami. It was going to eat her. It was going to swallow her, devour her soul. There was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide as it bore down on her with dizzying speed. Meiling's physical eyes flew open as her body was smashed into the stone wall of Zedong's fortress. No sound could escape from her throat as she lay stunned on the ground. Not even a low, guttural groan. The pain had not set in yet. Her body still thought she was asleep, still thought she was about to be eaten by whatever terrifying thing lived and breathed in Zedong's mind. Her mind still thought she watched snatches of her mother flitting through academy dormitories, still felt the very distinct lack of memory threads lacing through those colorless halls. So when Zedong dragged her up again and hurled her into the wall with unnatural strength, Meiling didn't try to brace her fall with her hands. She hit hard, slumped again. Belatedly, pain burst across her mind. A scream broke through her shock. Self-preservation kicked in, and she tried to scramble away from Zedong's booted foot. He kicked her in the ribs, something cracked, and she screamed again. He was yelling. The words slowly coalesced in her brain.
I would have made you my own princess. I would have made you my own daughter, my own heir. And instead you fight me? You throw my kindness in my face? Wicked girl!
With her last strength, Meiling lifted her bruised face heavily from the floor, iron burning her tongue, warmth dribbling down her cheek. She could not raise herself high enough to look him in the eye, but she could lift her eyes to see his knees. I never wanted to be anyone's princess, she croaked. Another blow landed, followed by another, and another. They were falling too fast for her to process, to hardly even feel. All she knew was that she was dying. She curled into a tight ball, the pain slowly growing more distant with every heartbeat, enough that she could spare a thought that she had been brave. That bravery cost her life, but she had stood up to Zedong for once. She had not let him continue to manipulate her and threaten her. She had fought back, truly fought back, not just resisted only to comply later. She had defied him. This was a death worth dying. And maybe on the other side of death, in the afterlife, she'd find Shang, and he would hold her close and kiss her until she forgot the pain she'd experienced in this fortress. This life and death would be nothing but an obscure dream. It wouldn't compare to the joy she'd experience to be once more reunited with Shang. Her awareness vanished into darkness. The world was flowing warmth. A bath of steamed milk and honey, refusing to let her leave that warmth. Her mind cleared slowly, bit by bit. You really got yourself banged up. You must have stirred up some steep mischief indeed. I'm impressed. Fei Yan? She opened her eyes, but everything was still dark. She tried again, to no avail. Was she blind? The sudden thought zapped through her brain like a flash of lightning. I can't see. You're in the dungeon, sweetheart, Fei Yan said. Some guards came and dropped you here a while ago. I've been busy trying to heal you. For a moment there, I thought you were too far gone. But we're managing. It just has taken a long time. Huh? She was lying on her back on the stone-cold floor of the dungeon. If not for Fei Yan's warm, healing hands warding off the cold, she would be shivering in an instant. Thank you, she mumbled. I thought I was dead. What could you have possibly done to get beaten to a pulp like that? One minute you're the queen of this place, and the next you're half dead back in the dungeon. Did you try to escape? I defied him, Meiling whispered. She could not help the grin that spread across her face. It wasn't much, but I went into his mind instead of the prisoner's. Fei Yan whistled under her breath. It was only a little, but I still stood up to him. Like you. Then Meiling whispered, How are you so brave? Fei Yan laughed and squeezed Meiling's hand. I've told you before, I'm not brave. I'm just stupid. Meiling scooted up into a seated position, not daring to let go of Fei Yan's hands. When the battle happened, I was trying to find you, and I ran into Shang. There was a tiny little gasp on the other side of the bars, paired with a slight jolt of the muscles in Fei Yan's hands. Things Meiling knew Fei Yan hoped she had not noticed. Hu Fen had said something ages ago on their journey to Liaofugan, that the healer from the academy had harbored feelings for Shang. Meiling closed her eyes, almost wishing she could have taken back the words. Was he one of the wielders here? Fei Yan asked, trying to make her voice sound light. He tried to rescue me. Was he killed? She asked quickly. Trying to save you? That bitter panic from yesterday swelled in her heart, the memory of her own screams rattling around her thoughts. She could barely get the words out. I don't know. I'd been trying to convince him to stop, to help me find you, and then he was hit. Shu Zhen drew me away before I could tell if he was alive. What? Are you an idiot? Meiling blinked, her grief forgotten in her confusion. I beg your pardon? You tried to convince him to go back for me instead of getting yourself out of here? You're so stupid. You should have taken your opportunity for the father's sakes. I couldn't leave you behind. I don't think they knew all the captives were kept here. They only knew I was here. Her cheeks burned, but Fei Yan had a right to know. They were only coming for me. If I had gone with Shang, they would have left. They would have left you and the others here. Fei Yan was silent. If he's still alive, then he must hate me now, Meiling mumbled. It was a useless thing to say, stupid to voice, but she couldn't have swallowed back the words if she'd tried. Fei Yan didn't seem to mind. That would make two of us that Shang Di hates. Then again, he never cared about anything except earning the next accolade and being better than everyone else. Going from indifferent to hated in Shang Di's mind is not difficult. Those words were bitter. He thought I betrayed him. Well, he can think what he wants, can't he? What matters is that you know you didn't." She shifted in her cell, and her boots scraped on stone. Meiling licked her lips. "What do we do now?" Fei-Yen shrugged. "We escape before it's too late. You know what? I think they forgot to feed us. I could be wrong. I don't exactly have a way to tell time in here, but I'm pretty sure they forgot to feed us." Just then, a loud, distant sound of a door resounded through the stone. On cue. Fei-Yen seemed to smirk. "I'm famished. You want to know something interesting? As long as I'm touching you, you can't starve. Pretty nifty, huh?" "Very," Meiling said. As much as she hated the darkness and coldness and stench of the dungeon, it was very good to be back with Fei-Yen. Light flared painfully in her eyes when their door opened. It calmed immediately, however, with Fei-Yen's grip. Fei-Yen, on the other hand, shielded her eyes. But instead of shoving food under the door, the two figures approached Fei-Yen's cell. One silhouette was tall and familiar. Shu Zhen. He turned a key until it shrieked.
"Don't fight me,"
he said in a low voice, tinged with exhaustion.
"Please, Fei-Yen."
Fei-Yen recoiled at the sound of her name. She let go of Meiling and stood up. "Give me one good reason, because I'm seeing a very good reason to fight. Several, now that I think of it."
"We're taking you to another cell. Separating you two,"
Shu Zhen replied, glancing over at Meiling.
"Orders."
All Meiling's hopes dashed to tiny pieces. "Coward," Fei-Yen spat, prowling against the far wall of her cell. "Dragon-blasted coward!" He stiffened.
"Please, I don't want to fight you."
"Too bad." Shu Zhen muttered something in another language, and the guard behind him stepped forward as Shu Zhen withdrew a cloth from his pocket.
"Last chance, or else I'm going to drug you,"
Shu Zhen said, his voice tight. "Fei-Yen!" Meiling cried, trying to reach toward her through the bars. Fei-Yen's gaze snapped to hers, fiery in its intensity. Meiling wanted to tell her that she shouldn't fight, that Shu Zhen would subdue her anyway, and he did not want to hurt her. But she held her tongue as she held Fei-Yen's eyes. Fei-Yen shifted her focus to the two men approaching her. She bared her teeth. The guard lunged first, took the brunt of Fei-Yen's quick maneuvers. Right behind him, as she almost pinned the first guard, Shu Zhen leapt and grabbed the back of her head, smothering her face with the cloth. She passed out almost instantly. "Fei-Yen!" Meiling cried. Shu Zhen swept her limp body into his arms and strode out with the other guard. They took the lantern with them, and soon Meiling's world was plunged into darkness. Chapter 19. Drip, drip, drip. Meiling huddled in the cold darkness, alone, numb. This was not how she had imagined things ending up. She hadn't thought that she would find herself alone in the dungeon. She should have known, should have considered the possibility. After all, Zedong was not stupid. She was weaker alone. That was why she had wanted to believe his lies. She had been alone. At least now, guilt over special treatment didn't gnaw at her gut. She was just another captive now. Just another wielder, far from home, a slave to a wicked man who would break her until she was no more than crumbling dust. But she had defied him, and even now, after her bones had been broken and reknit, after she sat in the darkness for hours, she smiled. It took effort and probably did not look much like a smile, but what did that matter? She was not a coward anymore. Or, at least, She was less of a coward than she had feared. She tilted her head to lean against the iron bars separating her from Feiyen's old cell. Hair fell in her face, and she made no move to wipe it away. Instead, it puffed upward with each breathy exhale, then returned to cling to her face when she inhaled. Zedong had seemed, in many ways, to understand her better than anyone else. He understood what it was like to be forgotten, and unlike Ma, he was no longer a low magic wielder. He was powerful, like Meiling was powerful. Half the time he had guessed correctly at her thoughts. He had a finger on the pulse of her hesitation. He'd sensed her weakness and brought her out of the dungeon, courting her allegiance because he knew she'd experienced the same flaws in the Empire. He understood her. And yet he hated her. The thought made her remember the dark magic spewing out of Meiling's memory of Ma's voice. "You think you are only misunderstood." That was how she had felt with Shang and Feiyen. And everyone, if she was honest. She'd always thought that if they knew her, if they saw the richness of her mind, if they saw how deeply she loved, if they saw who she really was, then they would love her. Zedong had plucked on that very belief when he had enticed her with promises of a society with no shame for those without magic. In some unnamed, hidden part of her heart, she had always thought that if Shang took the time to get to know her, he would love her too. But he had seen the depths of her devotion only last night, and he had hated her for it. The black magic had indeed brought out her greatest flaw. She faced it now with wide, dilated eyes in the darkness. That who Meiling was, who she truly was, would not be enough for many people. Many people would bear no affection for her, and she had always placed this on them. They did not try to understand her. They jumped to conclusions about who she was. They believed falsehoods. When truthfully, Meiling had faults. Loves, joys, cares, fears. And some people would hate her for the very thing that made her special in someone else's eyes. Some people simply would not like her. Their personalities would not mesh. Shang's was probably one of them. Shang, who bristled at thwarted plans. Shang, who refused to entangle himself with distractions like Feiyen and Meiling, unless specifically and strictly commanded. "Please don't be dead, Shang. Please, please." Could she ever erase that memory of his eyes as realization dawned? Would she ever be able to see him like she had remembered him until last night, tall in his saddle, fen held before him, and with a slightly crooked smile on his face? Shang, pleading for the brigands to be gentle with Meiling. Shang, holding her to his chest and comforting her in his arms? Or were those memories lost to those vivid, furious black pupils in her mind's eye that even now glared at her with venom? Or worse, his collapsed, motionless form? She should sleep. She should. Spattering blood spells! Ma would never forgive her for that language. But why was she still trapped in her mind? Surely she had torn enough down that she could have slipped out. Meiling growled. She whirled, trying to catch her bearings in the glittering palace of her mind. There. That was the way to the palace entrance. There, she could inspect the bindings and see if she could escape them. She ran through brightly lit corridors, flinging open doors and thick silk dividers. She looked over her shoulder, suddenly afraid to glimpse a horrible black shadow. But as far as she could tell, she was alone. When she glanced behind her, there was a flash of white. Looking down, she found she wore only her silken nightdress. Her feet were bare and fuzzy around the edges, where they hovered a breath above the floor. Irrelevant. Meiling pushed forward through her mindscape. She was almost to the entrance. Maybe there were still tatters of the crown lying at its base. Then she could tear away at the rest of Zedong's spell that held her captive here. That was impossible. She had thrown away the leaf. If there were remaining traces of the black magic, shouldn't she be able to hear its distinctive humming? The horrifying whispers? Shouldn't she see shadows trying to catch up to her? She rounded the corner, and there was the entrance. Meiling let out a piteous wail. No! She staggered back, falling into a heap on the ground when her ankle caught on the hem of her nightdress. Before her vision, the black barrier throbbed in full strength, stronger even. The little peeks through to the other side had been filled in, and the black magic extended higher and wider along the wall encasing the door. No, she whimpered. All of that work. Pointless. Had Zedong renewed it? Or had it regrown? Dragons blast it! She only wanted to be free! She would be willing to obey Zedong's orders about how she could use her magic if he would only let her be free. Was there no escape from this dungeon? From herself? She stopped. She looked up at the white ceilings trimmed with polished gold. Memory threads shimmered next to her fingertips. At least she found her mind to be an interesting place. She grabbed a memory thread, whatever was nearest. It sparked in her fingers. It thrummed with life, with the flavor of her older brother. Smiling, she followed it through familiar hallways until she reached his chambers. She glimpsed Yun chasing her straight here when they had been little. A peal of childlike laughter drifted past her.
If I catch you, I'll blow you to smithereens,
Yun had threatened, tearing around the corner as Meiling screeched with delight and flung herself into his room. She slammed his door shut in his face and, with a satisfied little girl smirk, locked it with the slide of a bolt.
You don't dare burn the door,
she had told him with a giggle.
Pa will kill you.
Aw, not fair! Come back out!
And then a little burst of fire licked under the door, close enough for heat to radiate into her feet.
Yun!
She shrieked, jumping to the side. He laughed at her.
Come out, or I'll burn your toes off.
She was laughing too, high-pitched and near squealing. She danced around Yun's flames, quite literally playing with fire.
What are you doing?
An adult voice sounded with alarm on the other side of the door.
Prince Yun!
Young Meiling slipped the bolt open in a flash and scurried under Yun's bed to hide. Outside, a sound like he scrambled to his feet and spewed out some sort of explanation to his nursemaid.
You are 10 years old,
the older woman reasoned patiently aloud to him.
You should remember to be the dignified prince you are.
Bless the fathers, he did not snitch on Meiling. As soon as he had dutifully received his scolding, he tried the door and found it gave. He closed it in a hurry and then hissed, "Where are you? I'm going to murder you." Her hand over her mouth was not enough to muffle her giggle. And then Yun dropped to the ground, snatched her leg, and dragged her out from under the bed as she tried to kick him in the face. Meiling laughed at the memory, smiling as she relived the heat of Yun's touch and lively play. He had always been the more fun sibling. Hao had spent much of her younger days pouting and complaining, and when she grew older, she just liked to pick fights. Besides, since she had been so much younger than them, she could hardly be considered a playmate. Yun was only 2 years older than Meiling, though he had often lorded those 2 years over her head when they were children. Back then, her lack of magic wasn't a problem. Of course, there had always been the hope that she would develop it later. Everyone hoped this, except for Ma and Pa, who knew the truth about her magic. When they were young, magic and meeting their empire's expectations hadn't been a concern. They had just been 3 siblings, fighting, playing, wrestling, learning. Eventually, they learned how terrible a thing it was that the daughter of a powerful emperor had no magic. Eventually, Yun and Hao inevitably suffered because of Meiling's supposed curse. Eventually, she sensed the divide between them. Between her and Yun. Yun had always been good to her. When he wasn't singeing her clothes, tripping her, or pulling her hair, that is. But he had never been good at hiding his feelings. So when he started being uncomfortable when she visited him while he was around his academy friends, she noticed. Meiling followed memory threads through her visits to the academy. She had always loved watching him fight in the arena and how he grew better and better. At first, he had been happy to see her there. He'd received her excited congratulations afterward with a brotherly shrug and blush of pride. Slowly, it had changed, until she realized how aware he was of how his friends perceived her. His gladness never shifted, but it was overshadowed. She started saving her visits for big battle examinations rather than his weekly arena fights. When she congratulated him, she waited until she found him alone, or mostly alone, and then she gave him her heartfelt praise. He appreciated it. He never said so, but she knew he did. It was clear he disliked the way people thought of her, but he was so immersed in the world of the academy. Strength, power, and prowess were everything. As far as Yun knew, she was as devoid of those things as a fuzzy yellow duckling. Meiling sat sprawled in the hallway outside Yun's room, reliving so many memories. Now that she did so, she could catch glimpses of Shang in the background, in another arena fight. He had always been there, on her periphery, and she had never noticed him. In all her memories, he looked very stern. Even when he was much younger, he had been so solemn, focused. Please don't be dead. She grabbed frustrated fistfuls of her should-be scraggly hair. It was thick, glossy, like she had just brushed it for bed. Soft, unlike how her hair must feel in the waking world. Why was Shang always so close in her thoughts? She almost wished that she dared let him into her mind, like Shu Zhen had let Fei Yan. Then maybe she could have someone to talk to. Maybe it would take the edge off the constant ache of her heart. Such considerations were foolish. She didn't deserve to think about that when she was the reason he was dead. But the thought of his name brought a flood of memories. The time he'd kept her from falling into the lotus pond at the graduation festival. All the days he'd helped her mount and dismount. His constant determination to keep her safe, to throw himself in harm's way to protect her. The time he'd pulled her sopping wet self out of the river and carried her to shore, commandeering Fen's cloak for her. Him holding her close in the saddle they shared when she lost her balance. His growls when she tended his wounds. And when he'd lean down. Now was not the time to be remembering how it felt when he had awkwardly cradled her in his arms and kissed her. She should wake up. The dungeon was not as dark as it had been when she had fallen asleep. It was also not as quiet. There was a blinding light and a terrible ruckus of echoing banging. Oh, brigands had come for her. Every bone and muscle in her body was stiff with cold and sleep. That did not stop the brigands, no sign of Shu Zhen, from hauling her to her feet and dragging her between them like a rag doll. They could only be going to one place. At least, the way Meiling figured, Zedong had one and only one use for her outside of the dungeon. He should have no other reason to send for her. afternoon sun blinded her like fire-hot irons. No matter how tightly she squeezed her eyes shut, she could not make them stop burning. Not until the light dimmed and she found herself thrown to splintery floorboards at someone's feet.
Princess Meiling,
Zedong's ice-cold voice rumbled. She blinked and was able to look up almost high enough to meet his gaze. Fang Zedong, she returned, not caring to hide the venom in her voice.
I gave you a chance. Many chances.
His voice grew darker with each word. He readjusted his stance, stepping closer to hover menacingly over her braced body.
You refused my kindness. Alas, you leave me no choice but to threaten.
Meiling gritted her teeth. She flashed defiant eyes up at him. When have you ever not threatened me? When have you been kind to me? Zedong crouched before her, one knee slamming into the floorboards and making them shudder. He snatched Meiling's chin and dragged her face upward to meet his gaze.
I said I had use of you,
he seethed. Metal scraped against metal. Her blood turned to ice. Cold steel pressed sharp against her cheek, and fear clambered up her throat.
But I can mar your pretty face beyond recognition. I can torture you within an inch of your life and still make you my slave. I can make you watch this fellow.
He jerked her chin so she could see stubborn eyes flashing between hair that fell in the young wielder's face.
I can make you watch him suffer and die. And as much as I prefer using your magic, old-fashioned torture will work in a pinch. I am not afraid to kill you, little one. The more you fight, the less useful you are.
He pressed the blade harder under the curve of her cheekbone, and she winced at the sting, then again as wetness dripped down her cheek. Her breaths were shudders. Every muscle was braced with fear. She held her tongue. She had nothing to say anyway. She breathed in and out and stared past the hand holding the knife against her face, her gaze latching on that lotus clasp holding Zedong's black cloak in place. There was a long, exhaling sigh. The knife eased away, and Zedong stepped to his feet, loosening his hold on her chin.
I believe I have made myself clear. Go into this prisoner's mind and confirm the purpose of last night's attack. Find any other information about future plans. You have 1 hour.
Before she could speak, could think of a way around it, could try to fight again, Zedong grabbed her hand and plunged something sharp into her now calloused fingertip. A little cry escaped her lips, and she burst free of her body. Immediately, there was no mistaking the difference. Zedong's mind was hedged in black, angry magic. It swarmed around his head so tightly that she could not even make out his face. He had taken precautions. He never wanted her in his mind again. She didn't want to go back either.
I'll make this easier.
Zedong's voice rang out in the sparse chamber above the same young wielder chained before him.
Every 10 minutes, my blade will take 1 slice of his flesh. Here's the first.
The young wielder could not stop his cry. It burst into her floating shadow body, rattling her tether. She screamed soundlessly as blood poured from a shallow cut in the man's neck. His breaths came hard and fast. Meiling flew into his mind without another delay. Chapter 20. She stood in darkness. It was not complete darkness. It was not a hungry, devouring darkness like the dungeon. Neither was it the colorless gloom of Zedong's mind. Instead, this mind was dark, but edged in light that seemed to have no source. Before her, tall walls rose until they disappeared into blackness. Forbidding stone formed the ground beneath her and the walls framing her. Meiling stepped forward and in the strange, unexplainable light in the darkness, found a jagged scrape sunken deep into that stone. Claw marks?
Is anyone there?
A man's voice, tight with strain, spoke. I am here, Meiling whispered in response. Awareness of his name permeated the air in his mind. You are Tao Zhenshu?
And you are Princess Meiling? I thought you had no magic.
Apparently, it was safer as a secret, she muttered. She took a few steps into Zhenshu's mind, and the path split in two. More claw-like scrapes were scattered erratically on the wall, sometimes on the floor, too. Do you have a monster in your mind? A wave of confusion rolled through him.
I don't think so.
Why are there claw marks on the walls? Is this a labyrinth? Strange questions, she knew, but they needed to be asked. Understanding seemed to flash. Was it a trick of her eyes that it suddenly seemed a little brighter?
Oh, well, this is embarrassing.
He was thinking it, so she knew it before he spoke it.
I sometimes lose my temper.
So you destroy your mind? Meiling raised an eyebrow. There was something about this mind that instantly put her at ease in a way she hadn't experienced, maybe ever? An interesting coping method.
I don't destroy it, I just add personality.
Meiling snorted.
What?
He demanded.
You can do whatever you like with your mind.
Fair enough. Meiling held up her hands in a placating gesture that he could not sense. I must look through your mind. I will be as swift as I can. A shudder coursed through him, followed by grim determination, and the cut on his neck throbbed like it sliced her own skin. I will be as fast as I can, she repeated. She reached out with her fingers and touched the threads shimmering around her. How different these memories were from hers. The vast majority of them involved the academy in some form or another. She touched a thread, and her heart lurched in response. You are close friends with Shang? She asked suddenly, almost desperately. Shang hadn't seemed the type to have friends.
Yeah,
Zhenshu said. Her words brought his memories of Shang to the forefront of his mind, and the thread in her hand glowed brighter. He was with you during the battle, she spewed. Do you know if he lived? I saw him, but I wasn't sure. A question flickered through Zhenshu's mind, but was immediately swept away as unimportant.
I do not know what happened to him. Many died.
A fierce stab of emotion followed his words. Guilt, sorrow, deep sorrow, and fear. Physical pain swept those emotions away, sweeping like wildfire in his veins, flaring in his hand. A voice.
In another 10 minutes, I'll slice again.
Meiling redoubled her efforts, her mind reeling with the throbbing of his pain. She wanted to soothe him somehow, but she needed to focus. She felt along the threads. More academy memories, history lectures, early morning training, late nights in the library studying with Shang, battles in the arena. Zhenshu was apparently one who possessed unnatural strength. When she had seen him chained in the chamber, he certainly looked tall and strong, but his physical body did not look capable of the strength she found in his memories. Strength that was now bound. That was when she noticed the subtle hums of black magic. She thought she heard them. Under the floor? Where's your soul tether? Meiling asked, hoping he could hear her over the flashes of pain he now braced against. He's bound your strength.
My what?
Zhenshu's strained voice echoed in the stone labyrinth of his mind. The very center of you, the thing that binds your soul to your body. Where is it? There was a prickling confusion, a sense of lostness.
I don't know what my mind looks like,
he said at long last.
I don't know how to guide you anywhere.
Meiling bit her fleshless lip. The threads of his mind must lead back to his soul tether. Maze-like as his mind was, could she grab hold of a memory thread and follow it back to the center? Her fingers closed around spider silk. She tore off down rising hallways of darkness and strange low light. I suppose the easiest thing is to ask you what the purpose of that battle was.
To rescue you,
Zhenshu said simply. Nothing else?
Nothing else that I knew. I'm not exactly a general, though.
In different circumstances, she would like to sit and talk to Zhenshu. His instinctive good nature, easy humor, and kindness permeated her as his heart pulsed with deep feeling. He seemed a fitting companion for one as icy as Shang. Did you know that the 12 captive wielders are here too? Leigh is one of them, the healer. Surprise jolted through his body, followed by sharp concern at the mention of Feiyen's name. And something else. Something. Meiling blinked, almost shocked by the realization. Shu Zhen, it turned out, was not the only one to harbor feelings for the vibrant healer. Unlike Shu Zhen, these feelings had been here a long, long time.
No, I did not know. I do not think the others knew either. Is Leigh Feiyen all right?
She's lively and undaunted as ever, Meiling replied. A curl of tension eased from his shoulders.
I'm glad to hear it.
It was as she had suspected. Feiyen and the other wielders had not been abandoned. Their whereabouts were simply unknown. Had a band of wielders tracked Meiling while the 3 brigands dragged her halfway across the country to this fortress? If she did not have a tight hold on the threads of Zhenshu's memories, she would have lost herself in the twists and turns of his mind. Phoenixes take this disorder. If this were Shang's mind, she would be able to find everything within a snap. His memories had to be stored in the cabinets at the back of the hallway that formed his mind. They were probably meticulously labeled and organized. Would you rather tell me everything or have me hunt for it? Meiling asked suddenly, bolting down another twist. The ground gave way to stairs and she hurled down, floating at the last second before she slammed into the floor and lost her physical projection of her body. If you tell me what he wants, we can finish this quickly and you won't be hurt anymore. If you don't tell me, then I might not be able to find everything he wants. In which case, we will take the full hour and you will be sliced several more times. If he's not satisfied, he'll send me in again later. Gritty determination formed in Zhenshu's chest.
You find it. Perhaps the fathers will bless us, and you won't find the important things.
Several things hovered just beneath his subconscious. Thoughts, information, he tried desperately not to think of. He quickly realized the folly of such a plan, and, in an effort to keep those thoughts out of his mind, he made conversation.
How do you know Shang?
Once she found his soul tether, she could find where all the memory threads converged in one place, so she could inspect each one until she found the one she was looking for. While she followed strands, she did not need to think much, so she obliged his desire for distraction. He and Hu Fen were my guides and protectors when the palace was deemed too dangerous for me to stay. How ironic life had become.
The secret mission he was not very excited about.
Zhenshu connected the little smidges of information he had received.
He cannot tell me much, but he was frustrated. Said he was going to be gone for a month. I did not understand why he was mad. It seemed like whatever it could be was a prestigious thing.
Shang does not seem to be motivated only by that which is most prestigious. Meiling responded, hurling down another staircase and taking a hard left. This path was particularly scraped up, but she kept her comments to herself.
Indeed. He hates showy prestige. Always has. Thinks it's stupid.
There was a smile behind that voice, a smile that was immediately cut off by another burst of searing pain. "Zhenshu!" Meiling cried.
Don't.
He gasped aloud at the pain, and the walls of the labyrinth closed in on themselves until the space for her to run was hardly wider than her own small shoulders. She rushed onward, refusing to despair. She was getting closer to that tether. Closer, closer. She had to be. Small, unused memory threads converged in the one she was holding, making it thicker and stronger. She gripped it tighter, hardly feeling anything but the skin of her own palms and fingers as she ran. She broke through the winding maze and stared down into a long, straight path that stretched for dozens of li until it disappeared into blackness. In the center of that blackness, a pinprick of light blazed. That had to be the tether. It had to be. Meiling abandoned her physical projection and flew as fast as she could. The light grew from the size of a pinhead to a fingertip, then to the size of a strawberry, a dinner plate. Why must it be so far away? Faster and faster she flew until the light was almost blinding. For a split second, she blinked out of Zhenshu's mindscape and found herself staring through his eyes at drops of blood spattered on the wood planks. She quickly blinked again and slowed so she did not pass straight through the soul tether. His tether glowed, shimmering with life. Zhenshu's life, his very soul and essence, anchoring his spirit to his body. A horrifying thought crossed her mind. Could she break that tether? Could she sever his life? She didn't want to find out. Another flash of burning pain, another gasp from Zhenshu, and the walls closed in tighter. A burst of blackness sputtered and flared around the soul tether. Meiling fell backward as the surge of black magic restrained his power, preventing him from using his feral strength. She needed to act fast. She reached out and touched his soul tether. It buzzed with Zhenshu's very personality, his character, the loves that shaped his life, his beliefs, his very himness. Despite the stress and strain of the moment, she was in awe of this ability to touch, feel, to know what made another person who he was. Zhenshu was brave, good-hearted, and willing to lie down his life for a stranger in a heartbeat. He did not get caught up wandering round and round on decisions. He acted quickly, purposefully, but not rashly. He was loyal to his empire, devoted to his younger sister and his mother. His heart still ached at the loss of his loving father, but it was not a bitter ache. It was one that was tinged with joy because of the goodness of their relationship. Nothing triggered his anger like injustice, and he could hardly contain himself when faced with wrongness. No wonder Shang loved him. Meiling followed the tether until it began splitting into hundreds of leads. Then she closed her eyes and touched each one. Quickly, only enough to get a faint impression. There was one fat thread that led to his life at the academy, another fat one leading to his family memories. Finally, she landed on a sapling of a memory thread, one that was young and tenuous. His career thread. She gripped hold of it and followed it back down the long, dark corridor. Whenever it frayed into smaller threads, she touched those and chose one to follow. With each step, she came closer and closer to the information she needed. This had been so much easier in Juan's mind. She had not needed to find Juan's soul tether. He stored his memories of the palace at the palace. His mindscape was familiar. She knew the layout of it well. But Zhenshu's mind was quite literally a maze. One of his career threads faintly hummed of a classmate, another friend, A friend who did not get the appointment she wanted. She had gotten something much lower, something that was both unsuitable for her talent and lower than her skill deserved. There were claw marks on the wall here. Finally, she reached the part of his mind that held the information he knew about the war. She stood at the bottom of 3 flights of stone stairs, the walls disappearing high into the blackness on either side of her. Another slice of his flesh sent her sprawling back. This one had been deeper. He made no sound, but stone began crumbling and falling down the stairs. Walls pushed closer, so close that she had to adjust herself sideways. Eventually, she would need to abandon her physical projection altogether. If she did not hurry, could she be crushed in this mind? Crushed by the strain and pain he bore? Was his life the only one at stake? She reached the end of the thread. Where was his knowledge? In Juan's mind, it had been carefully filed away. But there was no furniture here where he could store knowledge. It was only stone, stone, and more stone. Meiling threw herself against the wall, running her palms along the cool, rough surface. Nothing gave. There did not seem to be any knowledge stored in the stone.
Zhenshu, where is your knowledge? I cannot find it.
Meiling spewed in frustration.
I'm looking everywhere.
I can't help you.
His limbs trembled and his strength wavered. A new wave of determination pushed back the walls, easing her claustrophobia.
Even if I could, I won't. I'm not helping you give this Qilin spawn anything.
Then,
you only have 10 minutes.
Panic flared bright in her chest. She reached out and grabbed the thread again. She didn't want to do this, but it seemed the only option. Closing her eyes, she lost herself in his memory. Zhenshu strapped on his armor. Beside him, Shang did the same. They were both silent. The plan seemed risky, and Shang had told him 2 options he had come up with that he thought would cost fewer lives. But they were to follow orders, and even when Zhenshu suggested Shang tell his ideas to the lieutenant, he had shaken his head wordlessly. Zhenshu was to be part of the force attacking the wall of the fortress, while Shang was to be one of the few who would sneak over the opposite wall to infiltrate the fortress while the majority of Fang's forces were occupied. Zhenshu did not dare voice his fear for Shang's life. There were so few of them that if Fang suspected such a maneuver, they could be quickly and easily eradicated. Shang had not been surprised at this assignment. Zhenshu had been, partially because they were often paired together. It would make sense that the young, inexperienced wielders would be the ones thrown in as a distraction. Yet Shang was placed in the special force, either because his skill was considered much beyond his years, or because his life was considered more expendable. Zhenshu hoped it was the first. If they failed at recovering the princess, they'd bring a full set of troops, and there had been talk of siege, but that was deemed too risky. There was always the chance of Fang using the princess as leverage. That was what limited their military action. There was also talk of marching on Butagan in a counterattack to intimidate Fang and his forces. So many things hinged on how this attack went. If they could successfully free the princess from being a bargaining tool, that would give them many more options. Zhenshu clapped Shang on the back.
Get the princess and don't die, all right? Likewise.
Shang smiled, tight-lipped, and gripped Zhenshu's arm in a brotherly gesture.
Be careful.
Zhenshu nodded once, and they strode opposite directions, neither looking back. Meiling hit something hard, in her physical body. She was in her physical body. She opened her eyes to find the world spinning, tilting on its axis. She was going to slide all the way down the tilting floor until she went flying against the walls that rocked around her. Flinging her arms wide to brace herself, she swallowed obsessively to keep from vomiting. She was gasping, falling one way, then the other. And then she was being hauled to her feet. Meiling scrabbled with her hands, trying to find anything solid. Slowly, the world stopped shifting and tilting, and she found herself blinking up at Zedong's snarling face.
What did you find?
She opened her mouth, wanted to hurl an insult at his face, but a tortured cry broke through her awareness. "Zhenshu!" she tried, trying to shake herself free of Zedong.
Tell me.
Zedong shook her shoulders vigorously, making her head snap back and forth on her neck painfully. "Their goal was to rescue me," Meiling sputtered. "They were planning to have 2 groups, one to attack—"
Yes, I am aware of how they attacked us. What are their next steps?
She glanced at Zhenshu, bleeding from multiple wounds all over his body. She gasped for air, but her chest was too tight for a full breath. "It depended on whether they rescued me or not. He did not seem to know." Zedong loosed his hold on her, and she fell to the ground in a heap. She was scooting away from him, trying to reach the wall so she could lean against it, when he shouted, "Next!" The door opened again. She closed her eyes, shuddering against the cold wall. Not another one. She was too exhausted, too drained to keep fighting. Why did he wake her so violently? It took her so long to recover. A sob clogged in her throat. She bowed her head and let her tangled hair fall over her face.
Infiltrate this prisoner's mind, Zedong growled harshly. Find out what the Empire's next plans are.
Meiling said nothing, staying crumpled against the wall as far away from him as she could get. But in 2 strides he was crouching beside her, gripping her arm painfully and hauling her up. Too fast, he backhanded her across the face. Stars spun in her vision, pain erupting across her face. She couldn't think, not through her dizziness, not through the searing burn on her cheek.
Did you hear me, girl? Answer me!
Zedong shouted, grabbing her jaw and forcing her to look at him. At his wild eyes. Meiling could only nod mutely. Then she glanced at the prisoner, forced to kneel with his hands chained behind his back. He watched her with widened black eyes, his mouth open in horror. It was Shang.